You're listening to Whispers of a Witch. Hey there, ghouls and gals. I know this week was supposed to be stories and poems, and stories and poems I have, and they will be on the next episode, I promise. But I'm hoping you'll forgive me for doing another ramblings, because I had the chance to meet and interview true vampire royalty, and he is the perfect guest for this Halloween season. This international bestseller has a name I think you'll recognize. Dacre Stoker. Welcome to Ramblings of a Witch, Dacre.
Jennifer, thanks so much for having me. What a pleasure. You know, here it is, the 125th anniversary of Dracula, and people are still interested in hearing about, you know, the author and some of the secrets that I've pulled up out of the archives to share with everybody. So, yeah, thanks for having me.
So, Dacre, for my listeners that don't already know who you are, how are you related to Bram Stoker?
Yeah, okay. So Bram was one of 7 children born in Ireland back in 1847. One of his siblings, his youngest brother, George, was my great-grandfather, but I'm the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker.
Now, your webpage says you manage the Stoker estate. What exactly does that mean?
It sounds that, you know, my wife and I are like the Count and Countess of something like the Munsters or the Addams family. But sorry to disappoint, you know, there is no, you know, massive family estate hidden somewhere in Ireland or in South Carolina where we live nowadays. The estate is really, you know, it's sort of boring, but it is the intellectual property of Bram Stoker. Even though Dracula went public domain in 1962, so 50 years after the author dies in England, his things go public domain. You know, in America, different countries in the world, these rules are a little bit different, but basically, you know, that's what happens. Certain years after an author passes away, his material goes in public domain. But there are still some things that were not published. I actually discovered his lost journal in one of his great-grandson's attic, but the great-grandsons are wonderful guys. They're my cousins, but they're in their 80s. They're retired chartered accountants and not really interested in pursuing the promotion of Bram's legacy. So they've got my wife and I to help run the estate, which we do get some licensing opportunities here and there and bring in a little bit of money every now and then when people want Bram's signature or his face, his physical imagery. And sometimes, as I said, one of the books that I did find in their attic was a lost journal that was published, and luckily it's not in public domain. Yeah.
This week, I was lucky enough to attend your lecture at the Mystic Museum in Burbank, and I know you're touring all over California with the Menagerie Oddities Market, celebrating 125 years of Dracula. And you have a new edition of Dracula. What can you tell us about the new edition?
Yeah, it's been a real interesting labor of love. You know, I've written some fictional books that have, as you mentioned at the top of the show, become international bestsellers. The nonfiction book, The Lost Journal. But this one is special because I wrote it with a guy, Robert Teen Basang, a vampire scholar from British Columbia. And there's a really kind of a macabre story, Jennifer, that goes with this. We spent about 2.5 years reading through everybody else's annotated Dracula, cherry-picking the good stuff that we agreed with, that we thought was worthy of inclusion in a 125th anniversary annotated Dracula. And we came up with a really interesting formula. So not only do we recognize other authors and researchers that have made significant contributions with their insight and their research, their digging into the whole Dracula scene, but we also had access to Bram's notes that he used for writing Dracula that sit in the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. We also had access to the typescript of Dracula that the Paul Allen estate owns. And his estate gave us access to look at this material. And what you get in these things are lines and sentences and words and sometimes complete pages that are actually crossed out and additions that are put in at the last moment. So the Dracula that people have been reading for 125 years is the story that had been adapted many times in music and film and stage and so on. But they don't see all the good stuff that Bram, really good stuff that Bram had intended to put in. So Basang and I found all these things and drew our own conclusions in some cases on these and added these to this book. We even had access to the book that Bram used to cut out 30,000 words to create the first abridged edition of Dracula. There's a lot removed here and there. Also, the typescript started on page 102. So we didn't actually put in 101 pages because nobody knows where those are, but we have a pretty darn good idea from analyzing his notes of things that were intended to go in the story. So those things and references to those have been put in. So you kind of get, not a 2-for-1, not a 3-for-1, but about a 4-for-1 book, all-inclusive book that has references to different fonts and different highlighting techniques to kind of give you the complete process that Bram went through in the 7 years that he wrote the book, things taken out, things put it in the last moment. And just to really finish the macabre, my co-author passed away 3 weeks after we finished the final edit of this book. In a way, it's very sad, but I do like to recognize it this way. We have a nice memorial in the introduction of the book. He died in hospital. He had a not a very severe heart attack. He was getting prepped for a stent to be put in. He was on all these blood thinners to help solve the initial problem. And he got out of bed because he was impatient and went to the toilet and fell over all the wires and the tubes and banged his head and ended up having a brain bleed, just like the character Renfield in the story Dracula, who had the brain bleed and needed the trephination surgery that Bram Stoker's eldest brother helped him describe in the novel. And Renfield succumbed, as did Robert 18 Basang. So this, it's bittersweet and macabre, as I say, to bring Robert 18 Basang's last work to the public, a labor of love that he was involved in along with myself. And, I'm doing it in his memory and for his widow as well. So there's the horrifying story, but it's great news to bring this work to the public.
What a tragic coincidence. This really gives the book a very macabre and yet fascinating air to it.
I sort of feel in a way that in the pages, and this is not just to sell books, but in the pages, all the annotations, it's Robert's last words. He always liked to have the last word on things in arguments and discussions about our writing. And by golly, he's now got it because, we can't question him, about it. Why'd you put that in there? Why'd that get in here? Why'd you, so here he is. It's Robert's last words, and bless his heart. May he rest in peace by giving us his last words.
So is this book out and available to purchase now?
You can go to Amazon in paperback and hardcover. It's Dracula annotated for the 125th anniversary by Hellbound Books, by Dacre Stoker and Robert 18 Basang, and by golly, it's worth it. You get a lot of behind the scenes information about the research and the writing and Bram Stoker's intentions for his iconoclastic novel.
I would love for you to share some of the fascinating things that you talked about. Tell us about the first edition cover and why those colors were chosen.
Well, I'm glad you picked up on that because I'm a bit of a cover art junkie. I collect, first edition of Dracula's, the ones I can afford, but I also collect photos from friends of mine who are massive collectors, and I do fun stuff. I've actually made a tie with it. I've made tablecloths and things just to celebrate what all these covers mean. And when the book first came out in 1897, graphic art wasn't a big deal. And through the years, you see the influence of film and different actors and different things in different countries that obviously try to sell the book. And the one in 1897, Jennifer, had this mustard color, kind of deep yellow color cover with Dracula in red in this special font that, was created just for them because they didn't have, fonts like we do in our computer nowadays. So you've got the red and the yellow. And I generally like to question the audience because, it looks kind of bland at the time. You look at all the other cool covers that come up because of advancements in graphic art. And to sort of cut to the chase here, that dark yellow color represents, back in the Victorian era, decomposition and debauchery and just, degeneration. And that's what Dracula represented. It was, bodies, revenants from the grave. It was the color your body turns to when, blood is drained from it and it's slowly decomposing. It goes from this, dark red color to sort of bluish color to green and then to this yellow. And for all your listeners, if you've ever had a bruise, which probably everybody has at some point, that's the color of your skin as you see this bruise kind of fade away. That's the color that the cover represents. And of course, that's the dead, the undead, as Bram termed them. That's what we're dealing with.
I think it's important to remember people probably had a closer look at death during this time. It wasn't something so far removed as it is from us today, where we usually see it on the screen versus in person. So that representation was probably a lot more relatable at the time and really drew people in for this kind of gothic horror that he was presenting to them.
At the time when this book was written, the Gothic was, it was underway. Mary Shelley had written Frankenstein and John Polidori had written A Vampire Story. So Victorians were into this, this macabre stuff, the interest in the afterlife. And so in this case, they didn't need to have so much more. Sometimes, as we say, less is better. I think they got the message loud and clear with this, decomposing yellow color on this book cover.
So who was Bram Stoker before he created Dracula? I know there were already a few things out there. The Vampire had already been published. But how did he become the man that created this epic novel?
That is, the big question. And that's what I've been on the trail for the last 15 years, is trying to understand this guy's mind and what were the influences. What was that starting point to sit down and say, by golly, I'm going to write a horrifying novel that involves the dead, the vampires. So, yeah, as you said, there was a little bit already out there. There was the Polidori book had actually been turned into a play. So there was already some of it out there. But Bram himself had a lot of personal life issues that I think contributed to his interest in the dead, people coming out of the grave. He was a sickly boy himself and was an invalid for the first 7 years of his life. He was told all kinds of stories, having grown up just outside of Dublin, Ireland, of Irish folklore, which, if your listeners don't know yet, they will soon. Irish folklore is full of horrifying, life-draining creatures, changelings, pukas, banshees, their own versions of vampires. So it was not unusual for children to have these cautionary tales told to them to help them or to sort of force them to behave better, do what's right, be good people. Otherwise, the vampire's going to get you.
As a huge, massive fan of Celtic mythology, I know how scary some of those creatures are.
And so he was exposed to that. He was also exposed to a story that he later asked his mom to write up for him so he could use it to base his own children's stories in the first book he wrote called Under the Sunset in 1882.
Wait, Bram Stoker wrote a kid's book involving real-life horror stories? That's pretty twisted.
And a little sort of demented itself, because it's like if Bram Stoker survived his childhood illness and had to share the horrors of that with other kids, it's like, well, it tells us a little bit about this guy,
All right, what did he ask his mom to write down for him?
His mom witnessed premature burial misdiagnosis and premature burial during the cholera epidemic as a 12-year-old in 1832, and she told her son all about it while he was suffering himself and maybe considering that was an option. So, of course, he's got to share it with the world.
That's the kind of thing that would give you nightmares for life.
Yeah, I mean, and I know Bram did. I mean, that's one of the stories passed on in the family that, this great quote of Dracula was, there are nightmares for those who sleep unwisely. And it wasn't just that simple, Jennifer. Nightmares in the day were generally accepted as a form of demonic possession. Can you believe that? I mean, people felt that when you were asleep, you were vulnerable, and these restless souls, the devil, would creep into you and mess with your head and give you all these unnatural and strange thoughts. And if you got to wake up and go to church and get cleansed and figure out how to keep the devil from forcing you to do bad things, this is what dreams were like, and that's why poor Bram suffered these. And boy, if you do a word count in the novel Dracula, you'll find the word nightmare and bad dreams mentioned about 30 times.
So Bram was really pulling from contemporary thoughts and superstitions and fears of the day, creating something fantastical, but also kind of relatable.
You just touched on the essence of Dracula. Bram Stoker took all these things that were relevant in society at the time, the interest in new and emerging sciences, mesmerism, phrenology, the whole concept of understanding spiritualism more, the sort of the challenge of organized religion that just basically told you it's God's will, don't question anything, you live, you die, if you're good, you go to heaven, if not, you go to hell, no question, no in between. And yet during Bram's day, the end of the 1800s, people were really questioning these things, and they reverted to, these closed societies to do so. And Bram decided, for whatever reason, to write a book that delved into these things. But Jennifer, he made it feel real. He used real places, real events, real people. He said it in 1893, even though the book was written between 1890 and came out in 1897. He said it in real time, using real train schedules. That's what, nowadays we read it, oh yeah, there's been 1,000 other vampire stories. That's Dracula, I'll take a shot at this one. At the time, there hadn't been quite so many, but there also had been none that brought this strange supernatural being from this far-off country in Transylvania to the shores of England via Whitby and into London, the center of the universe, which it was at the time for the modern world. And this is what was haunting London, and nobody could stop it.
Did Bram actually go and visit all of these places? Did he go to Romania to really get the feel of the place and create Castle Dracula and all the scenery in Transylvania?
That's a great question. Many people think that he did because he painted such an accurate picture of it. But in actual fact, he only got as close as Germany and Italy on his travels with the Lyceum Theatre as the manager. But we sort of joke and say, how did he get to Transylvania? Well, he went to the London Library. The London Library had an incredible collection of books.
So if he couldn't get there himself, he made sure he did the research to make it real for readers.
It was his persona to do that, Jennifer. He was a precise person. He had a master's in mathematics. There was really two sides of his brain, as I try to explain it to folks. Most of us do have that analytical side and that creative side. And I think Bram Stoker was one of these guys that was split down the middle and exercised both of these sides of his brain throughout his life. As a student, he was an athlete, he was a philosopher, he was a historian, but he also got a master's in mathematics, but he was also a creative soul. He loved the theater, he wrote and drew and got awards for drawing. He was a founding member of the Dublin Painting and Sketching Club, and then later in his life, while immersing himself in the theater, he also was a civil servant as a paying job and a clerk in the sort of mundane department of Petty Sessions legal department, and he wrote a book about it, a manual. So that there was two sides of him, and that side of doing all the research to get it right was his sort of basis, but then he would embellish everything with great language and description and, of course, plot and drama. So this is what really is the essence of the story, is this man with these two capabilities coming together to paint this accurate picture of this far-off land, make the threat real by bringing him to London, but make people believe that, by golly, this just might be true.
Now, the other night you mentioned Bram was managing the Lyceum Theater Company with Henry Irving while writing Dracula. Did that influence his work?
But Bram had this reputation of method acting his writing characters, walking up and down the Cruden Bay, this 2-mile beach in Cruden Bay, Scotland, north of Aberdeen, as Dracula. And people were scared of him as this kind of robe was flowing and his walking stick and marching along and, reciting his words. It was really cool. I'm sure he learned this method acting style. Irving was really the first major actor that was famous for his method acting style, and Bram was his close friend and manager, and I'm convinced that's where he got it. But there's newspaper accounts of people saying, we were a little scared of Bram Stoker when he was writing Dracula, but in the evening time, it was fine.
I'm not going to lie. I love this image of Bram scaring people along the coastline while ranting as if he was actually Dracula. Okay, so back to the kind of creation of Dracula's world. Was Castle Dracula along this coastline?
There's places that my friend Mike Shepard, we wrote a book together about Slains Castle. This is a castle in Cruden Bay, Scotland, that Bram was invited into. Of course, he was very well known as Irving's theater manager, and the Earl of Errol invited Bram into Slains Castle. I got to tell you this, Jennifer. Slains Castle is a ruin today, but you can actually reenact exactly the same way Bram Stoker walked into the castle, in the exact same way he described in Chapter 2, Jonathan Harker walking into his fictional castle Dracula. The room layout, the octagonal room in the middle of the castle with no windows to the outside, is word for word the way Bram described Harker walking into Castle Dracula up in northern Transylvania.
So the castle is in Scotland?
It's partially in Scotland. There's two castles Bram actually used to merge to become Castle Dracula. And Slains Castle was the interior layout, and Bran Castle in Bran, B-R-A-N, Transylvania, is the exterior. So Bram saw two sketches of Bran Castle in two of these books in the London Library. He used that to describe the exterior. He used Slains Castle for the interior, and he moved it up into a region in northeastern Transylvania, very close to the Borgo Pass, very close to Bukovina, just as the story tells, on top of an extinct volcano.
So it all exists.
And they did. He even left the map coordinates in his notebook and names of rivers that were in this area. It wasn't even discovered until 2015 what these map coordinates really meant. You know why? Because Bram had inverted them. Almost as a way, I think, to hide them. Because, spoiler alert, when you go and follow, as I did with my son a few years ago with a guide and a couple of Romanian friends, we climbed this mountain. We got to the top of this extinct volcano to the exact coordinates that Bram mentioned. And of course, there was no castle there. But what there was, as I said, was an extinct volcano. And that was the most important part, because in the day, volcanoes were portals to hell, the home of the devil. And that's what Bram was writing about. And funnily enough, the original ending of Dracula actually involved a volcanic eruption, until such time as his editor or he decided to take out that volcanic eruption. But Bram was so detail-oriented that if he was going to have a volcanic eruption in his story right after the Bowie knife was thrust into the Count's chest and his throat was slit, this volcano erupted.
He literally made sure the ending could have actually happened.
It's precisely. That's Bram's persona to a T. He had to get it just right and accurate to create that willful suspension of disbelief so his readers would really believe it was real.
So we have real locations. What about real people?
He pulled names from history books. He pulled names from gravestones. Here's two examples. Captain Swales, who is the famous captain in chapter 6, 7, and 8 that Nina and Lucy meet up in the graveyard, and he tells them all about, the weird weather patterns, strange things happen in Whitby, and also the suicide graves and so on. And he meets a pretty horrible demise, and we later find out it's Count Dracula. But there's a famous gravestone in the St. Mary's churchyard in Whitby of Captain Swales. He also found the name Vlad Dracula in two books, one in the Whitby Library and one in the London Library, that he found the name Dracula. So Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Dracula III, the Prince of Wallachia, turned into the Count of Transylvania. Bram just needed a little switch, a little bit of merging of names and people and places to create this, this feeling that, my God, I've heard about that guy. Yeah, he had that background. But he's a vampire. I didn't know that. And it just creates that, just enough doubt, enough realism put in with supernatural fantasy that it just creates incredible sort of feeling and misdirection.
So he literally chose Dracula because he read about it in his research?
Yeah, he found this book that Dracula meant devil. Dracula was, in Romanian language, Dracula was the devil, and Bram was looking for his devil incarnate. I believe that he saw Henry Irving playing the role of Mephistopheles for many years on stage in the play Faust. So he's got an image of his boss and good friend playing this devil creature. He's got the volcanoes as homes of the devil. We've got spiritualism and the occult as a major influence in the Victorian era. And now he's found this real historic character who was bloodthirsty, not a blood drinker. Vlad the Impaler had a very dark past, even though he only reigned for 7.5 years. But boy, he had an appropriate past for Bram to connect to this devil-like creature. And it all came together to be the perfect villain.
Why do you think this story has so captured the imagination of the world? There are constantly new books, new TV shows, new movies, all featuring Dracula, a name known everywhere thanks to Bram.
I mean, there's a couple things. That the fact that it has been adapted onto stage, onto screen, onto streaming, it's so involved with commercial products, music, opera, comedy even, that it's just proliferated so much. It's out there. There's no pulling it back. He's ripe for interpretation for a century and a quarter. And that's what people are still doing. You don't get the first person narrative from Count Dracula. I want to do this. I'm off to do this. My next move is this. So we're still trying to figure him out. He's not defined. He's defined in the eyes of hundreds of writers and screenwriters and playwrights. That's why it's okay in my mind to be reimagined many different times over. It keeps him alive. He keeps him going. I don't think we're ever going to figure out who he really is. But remember this, the basis for him is in real myth. Myths of the undead, myths of bodies or souls that are not at rest, that are all over the world, in every culture. He's based on the universal myth, but his character is now universal because Bram presented him to us in a way that he is still interesting and still out there, and we haven't figured out who he is, so we're not tired of him yet.
So you don't mind all the different versions and adaptions out there?
Sounds kind of cheeky, Jennifer, but it's not trying to be. If the first one that came out was faithful to the book, then everybody would be watching that one who are purists and just say, I'm only going to watch this movie because it's faithful to the book and everything else is garbage, which I do hear people say. But I say, no. I want your interpretation. Some guy from a different country, some person with a different background in film, some different actors. What's their take on it? You know, I mean, the 92 Coppola is a great film, and it's probably 75% faithful to the novel, but the 25% that Jim Hart put in is brilliant. It's great. The reincarnation of Mina as Dracula's wife, that's brilliant. That they won 3 Academy Awards, that film did, and it's great.
That is my all-time favorite vampire movie. Now back to the man himself. The other night you mentioned quite a list of famous people that Bram was friends with.
He was good friends with politicians, with Winston Churchill, Prime Minister Gladstone he was friends with, but he was also friends with members of Oscar Wilde's family. Oscar Wilde was actually dating Florence Malcolm, who Bram actually sort of stole away and swept her off her feet and married her. Hall Caine was a very famous actor of the time, author of the time. Walt Whitman, Bram was a pen pal with Walt Whitman, and they exchanged a lot of ideas about writing and censorship and so on. And they also shared an interesting connection to pantheism, which is this religious or almost anti-religious belief that all religions are okay as long as we recognize, Mother Earth is still in charge, and recognizing heaven and earth and hell and the powers of all, upper and lower of this massive planet we live on. So that was an interesting pen pal relationship. And also Mark Twain was a good friend of Bram's. They were neighbors in Chelsea, and Bram helped actually Mark Twain by being an agent for a book to get it published in England. And Bram actually inserted a quote from Mark Twain in Dracula. Dr. Seward was having a hard time understanding and believing what Van Helsing was trying to convince him about the presence of the supernatural without any scientific proof. Van Helsing said, "I once knew of an American who so defined faith as believing things you know to be untrue." Jennifer, that is Mark Twain in Dracula. Yeah.
He was the American.
Yes. Isn't that cool?
Can you please share that funny story you told about Mark Twain?
On this special occasion, he was invited over for tea. 4 o'clock was high tea, and Bram was warned by his wife Florence to get back in time from the theater, make sure he was there so they could have tea together. And the Irish housekeeper was told, get everything ready, but don't want anybody interrupting us when Mr. Twain gets here. We want to have a private time with him. So anybody else comes to the door, shoo them away. So Bram rushes home from the theater, and he washes up and they come down. They're sitting in the parlor together. The housekeeper brings in the tea, and they're sitting there waiting and waiting and waiting. The clock is ticking on. It's half an hour late, 45 minutes late. And Bram says, the housekeeper says, "Well, we're waiting for this man, Mr. Twain. Has anybody come to the door?" She says, "Oh, yes, Mr. Samuel Clemens came to the door, but I shooed him away."
I just love this story.
And it's true. It's absolutely true.
So, Dacre, let's talk about you. You yourself have written a sequel and prequel to Dracula. How did that happen? Had you always wanted to add to the Dracula story?
When I got involved in Dracula, it was a fellow by the name of Ian Holt that said, I've got this screenplay. It's never gone anywhere. It's sort of a continuation of Dracula and the 92 Coppola movie, and I really think it needs a shot in the arm, and would you be interested in working with me to research Bram Stoker? I think he should be a character in the story, and would you be interested in writing it as we adapt the screenplay back into a book? And I said, hold on. If I'm going to do this and get my name involved in a project, I need to really know what I'm talking about. So give me a year, which he was in no rush, and he did. And during that year, I just researched my pants off and found everything I could. Went to conferences, went to Ireland, got to Trinity College Archives, went to Marsh's Library, read biographies. And as a result, fast forward, it took us about 4 years to write Dracula the Undead, a continuation of the novel Bram Stoker's Dracula, 25 years after the Band of Heroes supposedly killed Dracula, but remember, Jennifer, as we talked about last night, he was only killed with a Bowie knife in the heart and throat slit rather than
a stake in the heart.
A stake in the heart. Yeah. So our premise is that, without that volcanic eruption bringing the definitive ending, Dracula's going to come back. And that became a very successful book. It was an international bestseller. And during the process of that, I found Bram Stoker's Lost Journal, and that became published. And that really helped me get to understand who Bram Stoker was. And I realized the writing of Dracula was an interest, really interested me. How did he write it? Why did he write it? And here is really the pivotal moment that I convinced J.D. Barker, who was a friend and a good thriller writer, to help me write this story, the prequel to Dracula. And it was, how did Bram Stoker recover from his childhood illness, invalid at the age of 7, to become a champion athlete at Trinity College in all kinds of sports at the age of 17? And having been a coach at the Olympic level myself and realizing there's human growth hormones and steroids and all these illegal things people did, I thought, how does Bram Stoker get access to this stuff? And then they found out about bloodletting, and then I found out that, geez, the supernatural may be involved. There was this nanny in their life. There was a mysterious lady. And just maybe, there was some supernatural intervention. And if there was, maybe Bram Stoker wrote the novel Dracula as a warning to the world that this stuff was real. And that's what the prequel to Dracula called Dracula is all about. It's Bram Stoker's life leading up to him writing the novel as a warning to the world that you better watch out, these guys are real. And this too has become a bestseller internationally. The film option has been purchased by Paramount. So I've had some success in all the research and pairing myself with good co-authors.
And both of these are available to purchase, right?
Absolutely. I also sell them out of my website, which is bramstokerestate.com signature store. I have all these at home, which I sign them and inscribe them and ship them out. They're on Amazon and also on this 125th anniversary tour, where I'm popping around to different locations in California. I've got a good supply of them with me as well.
Since the tour is still going on, can you let my listeners know how they can attend one of these events themselves?
Well, yes, thank you for asking. The Menagerie Oddities Market on Facebook, and their website has got information about all the different stops. We are also going to be at the Murphy's Witch Walk in Angels Camp on Tuesday, October the 4th. Again, this is at the Bret Hart Theater. Tickets are available through them or also through the Menagerie Oddities Market. And these are kind of cool, intimate groups where I get lots of time to mix and mingle with people before the presentations and after. Sometimes I even do some cool readings from the different novels, imparting some of these neat things that get people deep dive into the research and writing of Dracula.
Dacre, thank you so much for being part of the show and sharing all of this incredible knowledge about Dracula. Before you leave, though, can I ask you just a few more questions?
Fire away.
What is your favorite scary movie?
Favorite scary movie? Poltergeist, I think, really affected me as a child. I mean, that sort of invasion into the home really scared the heck out of me. So that's not a Dracula film, I guess, because I kind of see through everything.
Yeah, and Poltergeist is a really terrifying film. It scared the hell out of me when I was a kid. Has anything supernatural ever happened to you? Something you couldn't explain?
We could talk another half an hour. I had a very weird experience in Marcia's Library in Ireland when I was there to do a presentation. I was aware that it was haunted, but not until after this happened. Apparently it's haunted by the daughter of Archbishop Marsh that created this really cool old library that dates back to the 1600s. I was sent downstairs to get set up for my presentation, and I felt there was a strange presence there. I wasn't sure what was happening. these lights that were supposed to go on, with these sensors didn't go on. So I had to take out my phone and use the light of my phone to get to my room. I opened up my computer. I've never, ever had this problem in my life. The computer was off. I turned it on. The battery was dead. I felt that combined with this sort of just something around me, this presence around me, I couldn't explain it, but that and the lights not turning on, they were supposed to, and then as my computer never ever had this problem, just wouldn't start up. So yeah, something happened, not sure what it was, and then later I found out that the daughter of Archbishop Marsh does make appearances from time and kind of, in a mischievous way, messes with people that come in. Not in this horrifying and evil way, but just mischievous way.
Okay, so what is the one creature that would really scare you to find out existed?
Whoa. I'm a bit of a control freak. So it would be something, and I'm just trying to think of a creature that can get into me, get into your head without your ability to stop it. Like, vampire, we pull out the cross. Frankenstein, you just run away. But I don't know if you saw Josh Mellerman's Bird Box. Josh is a friend. We have the same literary agent. And that story, Bird Box, where if you looked out and you're not seeing a specific thing, but just out in the day, outside, then the badness, that creature, whatever it is, gets through, enters your body through your vision. That's weird. That's scary. And that, to me...
Right, so something that can possess you.
A possession. That could get into you without you allowing it in. That sort of, if I desire something to come in, I'm going to live the consequence. But if it gets into me without my say-so and takes over, that scares the heck out of me, because then that control freak in me is like minimized, and I'm brought to my knees. So that scares the heck out of me.
Once again, Dacre, thank you so much for being part of the show. Best of luck on the rest of your tour, on that upcoming deal with Paramount. That's very exciting. And I hope you have a wicked Halloween season.
Thanks, Jennifer. And again, appreciate the podcast and also meeting you last night. Best of luck for an upcoming Halloween season. Best of luck to stay safe and stay scary, my friend.
There you have it, ghouls and gals. Dacre Stoker. I highly recommend going and seeing him in person if you have the chance. His lecture was amazing. Not only did he share a lot of incredible stories, he actually had an entire presentation and slideshow where he showed you all kinds of things that I don't think you can see anywhere else. There was some vampire trivia, there was prizes. It really was an incredible event. So do check out the links on my podcast. I'll have all the information for you to get tickets for upcoming events put on by the Menagerie Oddities Market. And make sure you go check out his books that are available on Amazon and on his webpage at dacrestoker.com, because I personally feel you can never have too much Dracula in your life. I hope you enjoyed listening to us ramble on. And if you loved it, please leave me a review and consider joining my Patreon for even more content, or sending me a cup of coffee. You can find all those links in the show notes and on my Instagram at The Witch Voice. Until next time, stay wicked.